Today we're talking about Nadab and Abihu. So if you're following along, Vayikra or Leviticus chapter 10 is where this roughly starts. And
I would suggest you buckle up because I don't know where this is going, but my thoughts are like, ooh.
Lacey said, do I have a thought on this? And yeah, I've always got a thought.
I mean, I have some thoughts. I'm just not sure that everybody wants to know them.
So to set the scene, at the beginning in chapter 9, the end of chapter 9, Moses and Aaron come together and they create a burnt offering to the Lord. And
it's like the sanctification of the actual altar.
Right. And they bring this out and the Lord comes down, consumes it in fire. It says the entire congregation sees it. Essentially they all believe. They're like, man, this is fantastic. The next scene, Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, which would be the...
I can so easily visualize this whole thing playing out.
Right.
It's just so easy for me.
So they're there's so many commentaries on this, it's insane.
Sure.
But they see this happen and
they're so excited.
They're so excited that they create their own incense blend and they set it on fire and take it to the Lord. The Lord sees it, does not approve of it. And
well, he doesn't even say I don't approve. He just boom, they're gone.
Boom, a giant fire comes out. They're consumed and gone and dead.
But that was not where the congregation can see, from what I was reading.
Okay, let's come back to that.
Okay.
So then after that, Moses says to Aaron, "You need to clean up this mess. Get some guys." This is the very paraphrased Rev Tavia version, you know.
Oh, okay. It's kind of like a comic strip.
Yeah.
Or what
He's like, "Get some guys, clean up this mess."
Graphic novel version.
And there's no mourning the death of these two. You can't show any mourning. Why is my question. I don't have an answer. And then at the very end of it, the passage, it says that there is to be no drinking. From then on, he says, tell your sons no drinking.
No alcohol.
No alcohol, no intoxicating drink.
So they were drunk.
So I would say a very obvious and easy answer is, yeah, maybe they were drunk. But
well, I think that's the thing is that you look at it and the initial reaction is they were just so excited.
Right.
I mean, how can we be mad about that?
So the Hebrew for that phrase is Aish Zarah, which means unknown fire or
Aish means fire.
Fire, yeah. So I to me that's I think one of the key points in the whole thing is that they brought something to the Lord that he didn't know. Prior to this, there was all of this here's all the different offerings you can make. Here's all the different sacrifices.
Even specific blends.
Here's all the specific blends. Yeah. And they said this is great.
Cool. I got it. I
got an idea. I'm gonna put these things together and I'm gonna bring this up. And Hashem was like, no, this is not what you do.
Well, here's what I think. You have to remember where people are coming from, where humanity is coming from. Not just then, but now. People are coming from a place where humans come up with things and think, this is what I'm going to do, right? In Egypt, they were doing all kinds of crazy, witchcraft. And I use that word loosely because, there's a debate about whether witches were actually bad or not. But just saying, they were doing things that were not intended to be, what's the word? Glorify God. They were doing things that were intended to specifically glorify
their gods,
their man-made gods, right?
Right.
And so there's a really I think a hard thing for people to let that go and be oh no, now I'm just gonna do what this very specific thing. I mean, I think they felt like they were going above and beyond.
Yeah, and was that what they were guilty of? Is so they were the direct descendants of Aaron. So after Aaron died, they would have been the next Kohen HaGadol, or the next high priest, the next level. So did they have to die because already they weren't following instructions? Part of me is maybe it's as simple as it sucks for Nadab and Abihu, but God had to make an example of somebody. He's I already told you how to do this. You're not doing it right.
Well, and it's almost yeah, it's a bad moment too, because they're already in this really this climactic moment of God has already descended from heaven and before the eyes of these people done this incredible thing, and so everybody's like hyped up, and I think we've all been in that situation in religious
And they're like,
places.
I want to try this.
And then they're like, yes, okay, let's like keep this going. And then they come out and God's like already like doing something really marvelous. There was no opportunity. It's almost like he was there. It's like being in the presence of God.
Right.
He was there. They were doing something wrong, and that can just not exist in his presence.
So there's this phrase.
So I don't know. Like,
there's this phrase that God says to Aaron, that Moses said to Aaron. It says, "This is what the Lord spoke. He said, I will be sanctified through those near to me, and before all people I will be glorified." And Aaron was silent. So that's after they're shazammed by fire. Like, that's the immediate response by God. God's like public statement of, and it's like, to me, like, I feel like there's a lot to be learned there. I'm not necessarily sure what the answer is, but I don't know. It's very interesting to me. There's other commentary that says that Aaron, like, they overtook Aaron's position. Like, Aaron was supposed to offer those sacrifices, so it was it was a disrespect, or like a not honoring your father. Like, they said, like, oh, I saw Dad do this, like,
now
we can do it.
Yeah.
And, you know, like, completely breaking any kind of chain of command down.
Yeah.
And that was a penalty of death because it embarrassed God, or embarrassed Aaron. And there's this teaching in the Talmud that says that if you embarrass somebody to the point where their face turns red, it is as if you killed them. Like, the blood is exposed. And I was like, man, that's a powerful one to think about. Like, maybe that's what it was. They embarrassed Aaron.
I think they embarrassed God too, right? I mean, if he can be embarrassed. In some
ways, yeah.
His face seemed to turn red.
Right. I mean, out of anger, I would say, more than embarrassment.
Essentially.
But
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting thing. And I think too, okay, how does that relate to me? You know, how am I going to walk away from this? Like, afraid to try hard, or afraid to, like, I'm going to be smote if I do the wrong thing?
That's what I, like, wonder about, is, like, the whole community, like, saw this, and then they're like, well,
I don't know.
Dang. Like,
so remember, I said maybe they didn't see it.
Right. Why do you think that?
Because when I read that, it sounded like they were inside a tent of meeting when it happened. And that then the people come in to pick him up and take out these dead people, and it's happening inside a tent of meeting, and they're like, don't let anybody see. I think that's what we read. I don't know if I'm really interpreting it right.
He does say, like, later on, don't leave the tent of meeting. And do not go out of the entrance to the tent of meeting lest you die, because the Lord's anointing oil is upon you.
And they did, according to Moses.
Right.
But so, like, that's what I'm, okay. So was that a part of it too? Like, they shouldn't have been even, I don't know. I think what I wonder is, would the congregation have been, I mean, how do you prevent people from mourning? You know, like, that's something, it feels like it's as much internally as it is externally, right?
Right.
But then how do you explain that? Oh, Nadav and Abihu, what happened?
Well, like, to me, it seems like it was, like, Aaron agreed to it because he saw it as appropriate, which, you know, and Moses did too, because plenty of times Moses speaks up and says, whoa, God, like, this is, you know, not really necessarily appropriate.
That doesn't seem to be Aaron's MO, though.
Right.
He's sort of like yeah, let's do that. And then he's like, oh, no,
even
I disagree.
Creating the golden calf. Like, if you think about it, Aaron was the same person that created the golden calf.
Well, he allowed the people,
He took the metals and made the golden calf.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think there's, like, interesting, what I love is, like, kind of picking up on these personality things as we kind of go through this again and again every year. But what I wonder about, like, okay, back to how do I translate that into my modern day life? And I do think that there is, like, this certain element within religion, and this is across the board, that you go in certain circumstances, and there's a lot of pomp and circumstance, and a lot of, like, trying to drum up and conjure up emotional responses. Because I think there's, like, as people, we want to be emotional. We want to be emotional with other people. It's a sense of vulnerability and connection to community. However, I think what God has given us is, this is how you do that safely. And then Nadav and Abihu that's how you don't do it. You know, like, That's too far. There is a line.
It just feels like their intentions were good, though. Like, you know, I mean, at face value.
But okay, so then we're reading, and then the laws about, or the rule about the Cohen not drinking come up next. That's exactly next step.
Yeah.
So, okay.
I mean, is it as simple as they were drunk? You know, I mean, there's plenty of midrash that says that that's what it was.
Yeah.
But to me, that just seems too easy. I want to discuss it more than that.
They were just off their rockers.
Right.
I mean, I think that there's a legitimate potential of that happening and people being, you know, swept up in intoxication. But I think there's that danger also with emotions and with these kinds of conjurings of spirits that I think are commonly happening in different religious places. And I don't know. I mean, is it good? Is it bad? I don't know. But that's what it kind of makes me think of. Like, when, you know, people start jumping up on stage and, no, I have a word from God and I have a word from God, or you know, like that feels like maybe, you know, maybe that's not your job. Yeah. So I think being realistic, like what Drew was saying earlier about how Aaron, there's a context, right? Like there's a way that this is meant to happen. You are meant to worship and glorify God, but you're meant to do it this direction. And via Aaron, via Moses even, and that's the way it goes. And when we make it up on our own, and I mean, isn't that what the whole of Scripture is for? Is to guide us in the like structure of life and living, and then doing that in a way that glorifies God, right? Like it's a lot of details, a lot of minutia, but that's the point. Yeah,
and I mean, I guess like ultimately, like even though you're really excited about something, like maybe it's good to pause and look at the framework and be like, okay.
This might be my downfall.
Yeah, maybe like that's another part of it is like the Aish Sarah is like.
Just because you think it's a good idea doesn't mean you should act it out.
Right, yeah. Like,
this is a lesson Lacey needs.
Yeah, right? Like maybe pause on it. I don't know. It's one that I've been thinking about all week. It's like, what is an Aish Sarah? Like, what is the false fire, like a unknown fire that you bring before God? Like, for God to not know what it is also is like kind of an interesting concept. Like, if it's unknown, why is it unknown?
Well, it's like playing a game with a cheater, you know? Playing the game with someone who's like changing the rules as you go or whatever, and you're like, wait, that's not what we said is true. And then, you know, it takes a minute, even when you know the game in and out, to notice that somebody's cheating, right?
Well, and like also the like all of the like quote unquote recipes of the offerings, like to me, like I think you read it like maybe most people do, is like it seems a little bit arbitrary, like these like recipes, like how did God come up with this? But then like for there to also be God to be like, okay, yeah, I did create these recipes for a reason. Like, you know, it really makes me wonder, like, kind of like on the face value, like the actual, like, why did God prescribe these specific ingredients to be used?
Like, how is it not good if we mix it a little differently?
Right, yeah, like, you know, like...
But I think that's, again, the lesson is like, look, I'm not being arbitrary. This is not arbitrary.
You don't have
to... That's the reminder.
You don't have... And that's, I think, truthfully very powerful, is like, you don't have to understand it, but you can't make it up. Like, is maybe as simple as
even if you don't understand it, just trust me. I got this, right? Yeah, like that's definitely... And I hear that argument kind of a lot about, like, how things from, you know, the old times, Old Testament, are not relevant, and we can justify our way out of this. I know that's actually one of the stories about Solomon, and the reason, like, kind of was his demise was that he thought, okay, well, you know, God might say this about relationships, but I'm so wise, I know. And his downfall was, you know, he had all his concubines, and that was really not good in the end. But but you know, I think all of us has like Achilles heel to bring in you know, other gods, but like that's, I think, something we need to realize is, okay, what is your Achilles heel? Like, what would you jump the gun on? And I think we're all individually eager to serve and do good, but what are we doing by saying, oh, I understand so well, which is really what Nadav and Abihu were saying. I get this. I can do it. Right. I'll take the reins.
Move over, Pops.
Move over, Pops. Yeah. And that's, you know, maybe that's like human nature right there in a nutshell, of like just constantly trying to take the reins.
And what is it like in your life that you
are not releasing the reins?
What is the thing that you would do that would ultimately kill you? Like, you know, like the thing that you do.
I think honestly we don't always know, and
right,
that's like why some of the arbitrary minutia things.
Right.
We don't know what is good for us and bad for us.
Right.
As well as the Creator Himself.
Right.
So even though we're like, oh yeah, well now we know.
To me, it comes to mind like when our kids are like, "Can we do this on Shabbat?" And we're like, "No, that's like creating or that's like working." And they're like, "But it's fun.
But I love it."
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, but like, it's not the commandment of Shabbat is not like, do you love it, or you know, like, there's certainly joy on that, but it's like, just because we don't understand it doesn't mean that we do.
It isn't what we
do
need.
it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Whew. Well, that ended up being good.
Right.
I guess. I hope. Let's tell us what you think.
Yeah. Let us know. What's your Eish Zara, and where is it justified for Nadab and Abihu to be killed? I've also heard the argument of it was unjust, that God overreacted. Is that the case? Maybe, you know?
Well, a can of worms.
Right.
Let's not go down that one.
Thanks for listening.